So, does anyone care to touch on this further?
My name is Jerry. I left MAGA. I've got a really heavy story to share with you today. Hey, by the way, this is me in post. I probably should have put a trigger warning on this because this is some heavy stuff. We're talking CSA, we're talking religious trauma, um, abuse and manipulation. It's heavy. Take care of yourself. Um, this is. I'm looking forward to getting to the other side of this project. To be quite honest, I was 14 years old when Jonestown happened, and pretty much everybody in modern society knows what happened there. On November 18th, 1978, People's Temple founder Jim Jones leads hundreds of its followers in mass murder. Yeah, you could algorithm, whatever, mass murder, suicide, unaliving, however you want to put it, whatever. I'm not looking to get monetized. I'm reading the article. But anyway, there was there was like 993 people perished in this event. 909, it says here. A third who perished were children. And the reason this is important, the links will be in the description. I'm not going to dive too deeply into this particular portion of the story because what I'm here about today is that here in a couple of months, it's going to be it's going to be marking the 3-year anniversary of the darkest story that I ever helped do any research on. I'm going to be sharing up a video that is going to help explain some stuff. I'll be doing some reactions and filling in along the way on that. But on the Shakahola Forest massacre in Kenya, which began in 2021 and came to light in April of 2023, resulted in the deaths of 429 people, including children, according to official reports. The victims were followers of Paul Mackenzie, the self proclaimed pastor of the Good News International Church, GNI, who allegedly led them to starve themselves to death in a doomsday cult before they were taken directly to heaven. Bodies were discovered in shallow graves across the remote forest area in Kilifi County, with autopsies revealing many died of starvation, um, while others showed signs of strangulation, blunt force trauma, and suffocation. Mackenzie and 94 co-accused were arrested and faced multiple charges, including manslaughter, murder, child abuse, terrorism, and organized criminal activity. The case has been described as unprecedented in Kenya's legal history. As of late 2025, the death toll has risen to 443 after additional exhumations. About 34 bodies formally identified and released to families for burial through DNA testing. I need to interject here. Um, the last I knew, the body count was at 429, and when the whole dynamics shifted from a rescue operation to a recovery operation, the Kenyan state turned it over as a recovery operation for the Kenyan military. And then I didn't hear anything. And last night I decided I need to talk about this. And so I've got some videos that are more recent, but I've got this other one that I want to throw in. I'm not surprised that the body count has gone up. I'm actually glad to see that they're still investigating this because despite this progress, 600 individuals remain unaccounted for, and the legal process remains ongoing, with challenges including witness management, protection capacity, and mental health evaluations for suspects. The tragedy was prompted or has prompted national debate on regulation of unregistered religious groups and highlighted the dangers of extremist religious movements in Kenya. And I'm going to do future videos about some of this craziness over there in Africa and how I see it reflecting back into the United States because they're linked. I'll get into untangling all that later. But one of the things that got me to thinking about this is what's all the craziness that's going on at the Zorro Ranch. So let's go ahead and get into this video. It's about 22 minutes long. I'll be doing some interjections on it, but uh, there's some really interesting links here that I feel like need to be shared up. Again, all the links will be in the description.
In March of 2023, gruesome details of men, women, and children exhumed from mass graves in the Shakahola forest near the town of Malindi in southern Kenya spread quickly around the world. The victims were members of a suicide sect that was led by a very charismatic man named Paul Mackenzie, and shocking information about Mackenzie instructing members of his sect to starve themselves to death to transition from this life to the next terrified readers. As the story began to unfold, it was learned that parents willingly instructed their children to die first as part of a three-stage suicide pact: children first, women second, and men last. As the investigation continued, government officials came to understand that members of the sect had been brainwashed. Homicide investigators uncovered several religious tracts published from Jeffersonville, Indiana, named the Spoken Word, a phrase used by People's Temple cult leader Jim Jones during his days in the Latter Rain movement. Investigators came to the conclusion that Paul Mackenzie had used the tracts, which contained transcripts from Indiana cult leader William Marion Branham, to brainwash his victims.
And you're going to notice a common theme because this guy right here, William Branham, is threaded through my entire deconstruction story. All of his work prompted so much of what we have in the country today that it is ridiculous. Um, but there will be more interjections as I move forward.
Little did they know at the time that this was the same William Marion Branham who helped launch Jim Jones' ministry in Indiana, or that Jones was a leader in Branham's sect called The Message. All they knew at the time was that the horrific scene reminded them of the tragic end of Jim Jones and his converts at the Jonestown massacre in Jonestown, Guyana. It was an observation made by several news outlets covering the tragedy in Kenya. By August, officials in Kenya uncovered almost 430 bodies. Of interest among the spoken word tracts and sermon transcripts recovered from the scene of the Shakahola massacre was William Branham's 1964 sermon entitled The Oddball. In 1964, William Branham sanctioned another splinter group that developed in Prescott, Arizona, under cult leader Leo Mercer.
Okay, so Leo Mercer in the park, that's a whole nother thing. And if I remember right, John addresses this in this video.
About the same time that Jim Jones began working with William Branham in May 1955, Branham also began working with Leo Mercer and his partner, Gene Goad. The two men recorded Branham's sermons, which eventually were transcribed and published as the spoken word tracts that Mackenzie used to brainwash his followers. After Mercer and Goad had established their commune in Arizona called The Park, Branham preached his blessings in a sermon that he entitled The Oddball. It was a theme used often in Branham's speeches, giving listeners the notion that behaving according to the cult's unusual rules and behaviors was to be praised. What happened at the commune, however, was not praiseworthy. Though the commune's tragic end was not so deadly as other splinter groups of Branham's message sect, it bore many similarities to its more destructive counterparts. Like Mackenzie's sect, children at the park were victimized, and parents were brainwashed to either support or participate in their abuse. Children in the commune were brutally beaten by multiple elders under Mercer's command, some bleeding through their underwear, while others were stripped naked and forced to march around the compound. Some children were mutilated or molested, also naked, and forced to run through the camps with sand forced into their rectums. In severe cases of abuse, elders stood over the children, alternating the lashes between the men.
Yeah, I need to interject here. Now, as far as like the assaults go, we see a lot of that in in those churches today that are derived from this movement. And as far as like the beatings go that happened at the park, the same thing, the same sort of abusive behavior was happening at Colonia Dignidad, which was founded by Paul Schaefer, an escaped Nazi who was a close personal friend of this guy, William Branham. Anyway, um, yeah, I'm going to run you down a really ugly path, one that I had to walk through.
Fortunately, the park imploded before the splinter group had radicalized to the point of having a climactic end and became fully extinct with Mercier's death. Many people in William Branham's message cult of personality and its various splinter groups are not aware of the evils that happened in the park and other communes led by ministers radicalized by Branham's teachings.
And on that note, there's also a lot of individuals who may know what Greg Locke is saying, but don't know what Doug Wilson is saying, or don't know what Robin Bullock is saying, or I think you get the picture. It's a segmented cult. MAGA is a segmented cult, and it's built on this pattern.
Mackenzie himself may have been aware of this history and harnessed the power of the neurolinguistic programming contained in Branham's speeches. It is very unlikely that any of his victims were. As it relates to the radicalization of ministers and their followers, however, this particular sermon, The Oddball, is interesting only due to an unfortunate parallel. One splinter group of William Branham's message cult was radicalized through a sermon transcript of William Branham praising another splinter group on the other side of the earth. In his sermons and educational videos, Paul Mackenzie taught William Branham's serpent seed doctrine, which was derived from Wesley Swift's Christian identity doctrine. According to Swift and Branham, the biblical Eve from the Garden of Eden mated with the serpent, believed to be the devil, to produce a second, evil bloodline into creation. The descendants of Eve's son Cain, according to this doctrine, were the children of the curse, sometimes referred to as the curse of Ham, due to the genealogy described in Swift's doctrine. This doctrine was used to radicalize white supremacists of the 1960s and beyond. White supremacists believed that this curse was black skin. Mackenzie and his followers, all having black skin, were likely unaware that they were being radicalized with theology developed for white supremacy.
Another example of how somebody is teaching something that is against their own interests. I find this to be a really interesting aspect of human psychology. I haven't untangled it yet. I'm not sure that I don't know. Somebody may have. I have kind of a general idea of what's going on, but um, anyway, it's part just I'm pointing out, trying to point out this bigger pattern here that I picked up on.
When William Branham rebranded Swift's doctrine as the serpent seed, he did so very strategically. Branham removed the words black and Jew from Swift's doctrine and convinced his converts to believe the pseudo-archaeological and pseudo-genealogical history of the two-seed doctrine. By gradually and covertly introducing Swift's teaching to participants of his revivals, Branham was able to push the idea of Swift's and other white supremacists' vision of impending race war.
Stick a pin in that race war thing because we're hearing a lot. I've been hearing a lot of that rhetoric only because of the areas that I've traveled on the internet. Pardon me, but yeah, I forget what I was going to say.
Initially, William Branham removed the racial elements of Swift's theology, though he traced the genealogy of the evil bloodline through Ham, the son of the biblical Noah, which many Christians of the era believed to be the origin of the black race. Once this was established, Branham introduced his hybriding doctrine, adding the racial component. According to this doctrine, a white person who produced offspring with a black person had produced a hybrid person, and that person could not enter the kingdom of heaven. Branham was eventually sanctioned for spreading this doctrine, and 300 ministers denounced it as abominable heresy. According to the historical timeline, it appears that the serpent seed doctrine led to Jim Jones abandoning the Latter-Rain movement. Understanding the timeline of the intersection between Jim Jones and the formation of People's Temple, as it relates to William Branham's involvement with the Latter-Rain movement, is critical to understand how Paul Mackenzie's suicide sect could seem so vastly different from People's Temple. Both were splinter groups of the Latter-Rain message, commonly referred to as the quote, message sect of Pentecostalism in the mid to late 1950s. While both were results of splits from William Branham's Latter-Rain healing revivals, core doctrines and interests within the two splinter groups were not aligned. William Branham used multiple versions of a stage persona in an attempt to appeal to very different crowds. And as those crowds and heads of the organizations gathering those crowds began to sanction Branham, the stage persona shifted quickly to adapt. In one version of the stage persona, for example, William Branham accepted the doctrine of the Holy Trinity to appeal to Trinitarian denominations of Christian faith. In other versions, Branham denounced the Trinitarian doctrine as being inspired by Satan himself, the doctrine of demons. By doing so, Branham could appeal to the oneness Pentecostal crowds that had rejected the Trinity. From its inception, the Latter-Rain movement was doctrinally aligned with William Branham and Reverend Franklin Hall. Hall was recognized for his book, Atomic Power with God Through Fasting and Prayer, which appears to have been closely aligned with Paul Mackenzie's suicide sect. Mackenzie believed that fasting could achieve the ultimate power with God. For Mackenzie, fasting was the vehicle that would transfer a convert from this life into heaven. In 1978, Jim Jones denounced the practice of fasting as a worthless spiritual explanation for not having enough food. Jones was somewhat aligned with Mackenzie in that he threatened fasting as a weapon of protest in March of 1978, but obviously did not choose it as the means to escape life on earth. By the time that Jim Jones joined the Latter-Rain healing revivals and fell under William Branham's influence, the version of William Branham's stage persona had shifted such that it was against the widespread fasting practices. This was not always the case, however. When the fasting doctrine of Franklin Hall was extremely popular among Latter-Rain leaders and converts, William Branham frequently advertised fasting as a spiritual experience. According to that version of Branham's stage persona, the blood flowed to the brain and opened the door to a supernatural experience. Long after Jim Jones had separated from Branham, the stage persona shifted once more. Branham was more aligned with the fasting doctrine in the years leading up to his death, claiming that members of the church should join in the fasts for powerful supernatural experiences. In fact, Branham claimed that if an entire church joined in fasting together, such power could result in raising a dead person back to life.
And that's why we have Mike Bickle and others, like Mike Bickle in Kansas City at the International House of Prayer, Kansas City, IHOP KC. That's why they had 24/7 intercessory prayer rooms. plural, worship music, all hypnotic, and people in there praying 24/7. Many of them, that's their job, literally. Anyway, it comes from this practice right here.
Another example of William Branham's ever-changing doctrinal foundations resulting in very different influences on People's Temple and Paul Mackenzie's sect is that of Branham's doctrines about education. Jones was very vocal in support of education, especially among the African nations. Paul Mackenzie, on the other hand, strictly forbade education. According to Mackenzie, education was satanic.
Does that sound familiar?
While both sect leaders are polar opposite in their positions, both are fully aligned with William Branham's theology based on Branham's timeline. When preaching with Jim Jones at the Cato Tabernacle in June 1956, William Branham praised education and announced that he wished that he had a seminary degree. In the 1964 version of Branham's stage persona, however, Branham took a firm stance against education and seminaries. According to Branham, ministers trained in seminaries were given instruction, quote, interpreted by Satan. This is largely due to William Branham's close ties with leaders of white supremacy during the 1960s as the civil rights movement began to push for equal opportunity and racially integrated schools.
And this is also at the same time where the junction happened, where the Democrat Party and the Republican Party split. This is the roots of the movement behind Donald J. Trump.
William Branham was ordained by, mentored by, and kept close connections to the second in command of the 1915 Ku Klux Klan, Reverend Roy E. Davis. While working with Jones, Branham admitted that he first came in contact with the Christian identity doctrine in Davis's Pentecostal church through Elder George DeArc. Though in that version of the stage persona, Branham claimed to have rejected it. Long before working with Jones, however, Branham taught the fundamentals of Christian identity. He claimed that Jews were the, quote, servants, and to
This is why there's so much spite and so many conspiracy theories that this is the opposite of reality. That this class of people control the world, but they're supposed to be servants. So you can see where that might cause some hard feelings. And like I said, this is something that's been passed down through this movement ever since then, and it's gotten quite radical. Or maybe the radical is just boiled up to the surface more clearly.
be separate from other Christians. He taught Wesley Swift's genealogy of the two-seed doctrine, pointing to the offspring of Ham, believed to be the nations of Africa, for the evil seed as early as 1953. Though William Branham appears to have concealed his personal beliefs towards the superiority of people with white skin while working with Jones, it is clear that the Klan had a deep influence on Branham's doctrine. As Roy Davis rose through the ranks of the third wave of the Ku Klux Klan to become the Imperial Wizard, Branham's white supremacy doctrine became more openly taught in his revivals. In 1959, Roy Davis was chosen to be the Imperial Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in Dallas by Imperial Wizard Eldon Edwards. Davis was widely discussed in national news media during this time, and Branham frequently dropped Davis's name in his healing revivals.
Now, for a point of reference, in 1914, the Assembly of God Church was founded. In 1915, the newest iteration of the Klan was founded by some of the same people that founded the Assemblies of God Church, the church I grew up in.
Branham wanted his listeners to know that he had a long history with the Imperial Wizard. As the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacy groups in the 1960s rose against the education system for the push towards racial integration, Branham began shifting his doctrines towards alignment with the agenda. Branham claimed that education, civilization, and the modern trend of the day was, quote, of the devil. He claimed that.
Does that sound familiar?
The school system was producing a large percentage of mentally retarded students.
Oh, well, today now that's transgender kids, right? And furries. Anyway, it doesn't take much to connect these ideas together.
He openly declared himself to be a segregationalist and taught that one cannot be a Christian if they were not. His high-breeding doctrine transitioned to include the public school system in the theology, blasting politicians for trying to, quote, ruin the race of people, because African Americans, quote, got better schools than whites. Branham labeled civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King as, quote, communist, and was very outspoken against students such as Air Force veteran James Meredith, who fought for equal opportunity. Prior to the open alignment with white supremacy, the versions of William Branham's stage persona were vastly different and influenced a wide range of people and movements. Like Jim Jones, the Children of God founder Moses David Berg was a latter-rain convert deeply influenced by William Branham. The Children of God was famous for their happy hookers for Jesus, women that recruited men into the cult through sex. Berg was a Christian and Missionary Alliance minister ousted from the organization due to allegations of sexual misconduct. After Berg was defrocked, Branham issued a prophetic blessing on his ministry, just as he had done for Jones in 1956.
Okay, I'm going to interject here. This is where I wanted to interject. Sorry about the other interruptions. If Children of God sounds familiar to you, if you're acquainted with Daniela Mastinek Young, the knitting cult lady, you know that she grew up in the Children of God's cult and then went off into the military and was in Army intelligence. And this was her interview with Shirley Sansola over at Cults to Consciousness. I'll provide links to both of those. I'm not going to play any of this, but you really should listen to Daniela's story when it comes to how she grew up. I mean, if you aren't familiar with her story, she has a picture of herself at the age of 3 in aluminum foil armor of God stuff, right? We're talking Christian warrior stuff here. So that's linked back to William Branham, just like Jim Jones is. And I just wanted to go, that's why David Berg is mentioned in the title.
And he inspired Berg to teach junior classes. This eventually led to the formation of the Children of God sect. Until his death in 1994, Berg continued to promote William Branham's prophetic ministry, publishing literature about the life story accounts that William Branham used for his stage persona, teaching Branham's version of the doctrine about UFOs, spreading news about Branham's halo photograph, and angelic commission, and more.
Okay, so the UFO reference there. William Branham said UFOs were going to be the tools used by God to perform the rapture. Again, this is 1950s, and so flying saucers and stuff were big talk. And yeah, today I've heard a lot of, well, over the last few years, I've heard a lot of folks on the MAGA side of things, at least in the depths where I was, where people were debating if aliens were actually angels or demons, but only the Vatican knows for sure. It gets crazy. But yeah, William Branham was saying that the righteous would be caught up by UFOs, but the elite would be taken directly to the mothership. And as soon as you're on board, you get your glorified body.
Some of those doctrines, such as the doctrine of otherworldly dimensions and UFOs, carried forward to the same version of stage persona in use when Jim Jones worked with Branham in the latter-rain healing revivals.
And that's why there's this new conspiracy theory that Bigfoot's really an interdimensional creature, and the aliens and anyway, it's wild.
Like Berg, Jones remained fully aligned with those extraterrestrial doctrines. Berg, however, was converted under an earlier version of the stage persona than Jones, and was aligned with the white supremacy. Berg openly stated that he was, quote, an anti-Semite because God is. Yes, I'm a racist because God is. Interestingly, splinter groups of Berg's Children of God sect, such as the Jesus Christians, openly showed their support for Paul Mackenzie's doomsday theology during Mackenzie's arrest in 2019 for radicalizing children with Christian extremism. There were several black members of People's Temple, and Jones supported and promoted equal opportunity. This was not the case, however, with many splinter groups of William Branham's message cult. As unusual as it sounds, Branham's doctrines of white supremacy are widely adopted among converts in the nations of Africa, including converts with black skin, and some openly teach the racist version.
I found one in particular, and I've lost track of. I think I backed it up on another portable hard drive that I lost possession of along the way. Things happen, but there's actually a black African Pentecostal preacher who preaches Branham's doctrine with the racist theme. So he's preaching to his people that they're subservient, that they're less than white people. Just, man, the human psyche is wild. Yeah, I know that's a crazy word, but mm, there's another word. There's another word that was part of my vocabulary quite a bit this morning before I got on camera, and I'm trying to keep it civil.
The Ivory Coast, for example, Black Message sect leader Cacao Felipe prides himself in being fully aligned with the latest version of William Branham's stage persona, and he openly teaches the white supremacy doctrines. Felipe is fully aware that they were intended for purposes of discrimination against people with black skin, and he instructs his converts to accept the discrimination. It is, according to Felipe, the quote, divine decree of the white man for peace and stability. Felipe was introduced to Branham's teachings through latter-rain cult leader Ewald Frank, and
Ewald Frank is another interesting character because he's directly linked to Operation Condor. Um, he was known as Mr. Crutchfeld in CIA documents and was key into getting German weapons manufacturing equipment, machining equipment, into Chile. Of course, with the cooperation of Chile. Anyway, it's a big, messy story. Uh, but this guy also traveled around Canada and the northern United States quite a bit amongst the Mennonite community, the old order stuff.
considers himself to be a disciple of Frank rather than a disciple of Branham. Frank was instrumental in helping to establish various sects devoted to William Branham's doctrine in multiple parts of the world, including South America. Frank has deep ties to the infamous Colonia Dignidad, where hundreds of people were killed and buried in mass graves. In Africa, Frank's influence reaches as far west as the Ivory Coast and as far east as Nairobi, Kenya, near Paul Mackenzie's suicide sect. Felipe claimed that William Branham laid the initial foundation of the doctrine, which he called the Evening Light, and that Frank furthered William Branham's doctrine with the Midnight Cry, for which Felipe's sect is named. That foundation includes the Christian identity doctrine of Wesley Swift, the same racist theology used by Paul Mackenzie to brainwash his sect of converts. Like Jones and Berg, Felipe adopted Branham's doctrines of dimensions and UFOs. Felipe is recognized, however, for the hate speech and has been arrested multiple times. There are literally thousands of similar sects spread around the world who are dedicated to Branham's teaching or influenced by Branham's doctrine. The vast majority of them are somewhat benign when compared to sects like Jones, Mackenzie, Mercier, Berg, Felipe, and Colonia Dignidad. Some have been radicalized, but in much different ways. Some sects terrorize women on the streets for not adhering to the Pentecostal dress code. Others abuse their power over brainwashed converts to have sex with them, often through polygamy, sometimes rape. Leaders of splinter groups use their power for financial schemes, money laundering, and organizing assaults on members of other faiths. There is no way to predict when or how the radicalized sects will lead their members into a climactic event, such as the Jonestown massacre or the Shakahola Forest Massacre. But one thing is for certain: all sects that have been radicalized by Branham's doomsday theology are at risk.
I really appreciate the work that John did on that. And I wasn't the only co-researcher assisting in that whole project. So I'm gonna go back to about a year ago, and we're gonna pick up on a few stories. Um, we may not sit through all of this one. This is I'm this is if you haven't already figured out by now. Anyway, this is heavy stuff. Let's just go ahead and open this up.
Children. The families of the victims have been waiting to give them a decent burial, but their wait seems to be an unending one, with the government failing to complete the identification process due to what sources say is a lack of DNA reagents. Brenda Wanga spoke to some of the families and tells of the 2 years of anguish, pain, and despair.
Ukifikiria watoto wako wako hapa, unasikia vibaya.
Forty-seven-year-old Stephen Mwiti cuts the figure of a lonely man, and he is, both literally and figuratively. In 2017, he sat at the helm of a family of 7, his wife and 5 children. This changed in late 2022, and as he told the magistrate in the ongoing trial of Paul Mackenzie and his co-accused, amongst them his wife, those events that deprived him of his family are still as clear as day to him.
Siwezi sahau 2022 mwezi wa 8 tarehe 20. Hiyo siku siwezi sahau sababu kutoka hiyo siku sijaiona watoto wangu mpaka leo.
He carries the memory of his 5 children with him. In his humble abode, mementos of his then school-going children are strewn all over, some in the same state they were when they left them for Chakama Ranch and then Shakahola. Mwiti's wife, now a suspect in the Shakahola massacre trial, was a strict adherent to the doctrines and teachings of Mackenzie.
Akaingia Shakahola 2022 mwezi wa 8 tarehe 20, na alipofika huko sababu watoto walikuwa wengi, ile chakula ikamuishia, ikabidi anitafute.
Okay, so we don't have subtitles there. Maybe I should see if I can turn them on. Maybe they'll translate. Let me back that up a little bit.
Ingia Shakahola 2022 mwezi wa 8 tarehe 20, na alipofika huko sababu watoto walikuwa wengi, ile chakula ikamuishia, ikabidi anitafute. Aliponitafuta tukaongea
Well, I wish there was a translation on that. But as I stated earlier, I found an interview with an escaped cult member, and it's all in English. So we will revisit we'll visit that, and please try to keep these folks in mind. Again, I also just recently I just stumbled on this last night, and as you can see, it's from July 2025. And let's just see what they got. It's not a very long report.
Tonight, disturbing developments out of Kilifi County are igniting fears that the horror of Shakahola may not be over. Almost 2 years since the horrifying discovery of mass graves in Shakahola Forest, there are renewed cases of cult practices after authorities recovered 1 body and rescued 4 emaciated individuals just kilometers from the original Shakahola site. Even more unsettling, among those arrested are a husband and wife who are former victims of the Shakahola cult who vanished from their home in Siaya County and returned to the forest. As you'll hear now from Emily Chebet, a relative claims the man left with 6 children whose whereabouts remain unknown.
Almost 2 years after the chilling discovery of mass graves in what came to be known as the Shakahola massacre, new developments are raising fears that history may be repeating itself in Kilifi County. The recent arrest of a couple from Siaya County, both of whom were rescued during the 2023 operation, and a report of their 6 children missing, has revived the haunting echoes of 2023 cult practice.
Watu walipokuwa wanatolewa huko tuliweza kumwokoa na akaenda nyumbani kabla watu hawajakuwa arrested. Kwa hivyo yeye alienda mapema na akaenda nyumbani na tulijua ya kwamba atareform akiwa huko nyumbani.
According to the brother of one of the victims who is in custody with the wife, the pair escaped from their home in March this year and traveled hundreds of kilometers back to Kilifi with their children aged between 1 and 15 years.
Walitoka huko Siaya, sehemu inaitwa Nyadorera. Na hao watoto nimeishi nao na kuna mtoto ndio nilifuatilia ili nijue watoto wako hali gani. Lakini
I'm going to have to keep an eye on that. So from October of last year, October 2025, families continue receiving victims' remains after 2 years. So apparently they're getting the reagents that they need. I'm not going to do that one. Link will be in the description. And let's go ahead and listen to this. It's only 2 minutes. High Court orders fresh statement from accused as state witness in Shakahola massacre case.
Be a flock of birds. Now, the High Court in Mombasa has directed one of the accused persons in the Shakahola massacre murder case to record fresh statements as state witness. The orders were issued by Lady Justice Diana Mochache after she allowed an application by the accused seeking to make a new confession and enter into plea negotiations with the prosecution. Enos Amanya, also known as Hallelujah, is expected to testify on Friday afternoon after agreeing to turn into state witness to testify against Paul Nthenge Mackenzie. Justice Mochache also ordered that Enos Amanya be separated from the other accused persons for his safety after agreeing to cooperate with the investigators and prosecutors.
Seems like good news to me. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe
Do you trust what Chief Inspector Kamau produced before this honorable court? Whatever it is, because he was your co-investigator.
I don't know what he produced.
So you cannot attest to it.
Yeah, they were against healthcare, my lady, the preachings. Also against government authority, e.g. acquiring national identity cards. They were being asked to destroy them, not to take, or rather to register for huduma number.
Yale wewe ulifanya mwenyewe kama Haleluya. Unaweza ongea pia ya yale ambao wengine walifanya. Lakini si kusema wengine walifanya hivi na wewe hukufanya chochote, si ndio? Wewe ndio unakubali makosa. Wewe ndio umeamua kukubali makosa. Sasa wakili wako amesema atakuelekeza uandike another confession.
Yes, wow. All right. Well, that's all the videos I've got for you. And I'm hoping that you've been able to maybe see some parallels. Maybe hopefully I've been able to help you connect some things from the past to the present. And a much deeper look into some of the darknesses that I've been tracking over the years. Yeah, anyway, if you've made it to the end of this video, I appreciate it because it tells me that you're hungry for knowledge. If you appreciated this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. Feel free to share this with anybody that you think it might help. Until the next video, take care of yourself, take care of each other, get the rest you need, and keep track of those fluids.
Everybody wants to